At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Anxiety. I think it's something that we all experience in our lives. And what's interesting is over the past couple of years, it's even been enhanced, the amount of anxiety that we can sense because of COVID and other things that are going on. And the question is at what level does anxiety actually take control of our lives and our ability to function in a healthy way? I'm really pleased today to have Elke Scholz on the line with us today. She is a psychotherapist. She has written a couple of wonderful books in regards to this topic. And hopefully we're going to have a discussion that you'll find very interesting and very insightful as to anxiety and the levels of anxiety and how can we deal with those in a healthy way that will allow us to function in a more full way in our lives. So please join us. Hey folks, thanks for joining us today. Elke, how are you doing?
Fabulous. Thank you, Doug.
Hey, I am so pleased to have you on the show. This whole topic of anxiety is really fascinating to me because I know a number of people that really experience it to some heavy degree sometimes. And it seems like, based on your experience, are you seeing that there's an uptick to the amount of individuals that are experiencing some level of anxiety in their lives?
Absolutely, Doug. Absolutely. And what I'm seeing is that if you had stress or anxiety or depression before 2020, it's almost like you've got this extra sack of potatoes on you, and that weight is even heavier. So yes, cases are more intense. I'm seeing more younger people, and people are just breaking down more. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And yeah.
So let's talk about anxiety, because that's really what your book is about. And, before we get started, go ahead and show for the audience who's watching the video. And folks, for those of you that are listening, go ahead and talk about your book for a minute.
Well, there it is with all the
There it
papers
is.
in it.
Okay. Anxiety Warrior is one of your books. The other book is Loving Your Life.
Yep.
And does that one also talk about anxiety?
Well, it's interesting. No, Loving Your Life is about coming back to who you are and coming back to our humanness, our connection to nature, a connection to ourself. And it's an exploration in noticing your inspirations and what feeds your spirit and yourself.
All right, I want to talk about that for a minute, because I kind of have a philosophy that I'll share, and I am not a PhD. I'm not a psychotherapist, though I've done a tremendous amount of study and so forth. Here's my question. When someone is experiencing anxiety, it's going to be a question and a statement. I get the sense that oftentimes that anxiety is a result of the fact that they are not really experiencing who they genuinely are. And oftentimes they're so at the mercy of society, of being told what they need to do, who they need to be, all of those types of things. You need to be perfect. You need to do this and that. And then when they're not, that, in my opinion, seems to instill that sense of anxiety. Now, am I way off?
Actually, no, you're bang on. However, I've discovered in my own exploration, because I do manage anxiety myself, and with my clients, there's 11 layers. So what you just mentioned is one of the layers. Absolutely.
Okay.
So yes.
And there are different levels of anxiety, right?
There's different levels, there are different kinds. And what I've noticed is that anxiety comes from different places, and that's what's made it confusing. So let's say you are connected to who you are and you are living your best life, and yet you're still experiencing anxiety. There's this big mystery of where is it coming from? So I can answer that.
Okay, and we're going to get into that because I'd like to have you talk a little bit about what are some of the root causes of anxiety, and in some cases even talk a little bit outside of the box, and what are some things that may be the causes that we would never imagine. For instance, nutrition. How much does nutrition play, and those type of things? So go ahead and talk a little bit about anxiety and some of the causes that you've observed, because obviously, as you say, they come from all different sorts of places.
Absolutely. And thanks, Doug. And you know, my clients, I think they're sometimes surprised because what I do ask is, what are they putting in their mouths? And substances I just call it substances. So something as simple as water, you know, when we sleep at night, we are actually sweating and dehydrating. And if we're in a place of dehydration, whether it's first thing in the morning or through the day, our brain actually sends signals that feel like anxiety. So a simple sip of water, like, you know, a quarter cup. So the first thing I ask people is, do you wake up with anxiety? And when do you have your anxiety? And if it's in the morning, then one of the things I suggest is have a little drink of water. And it's amazing how many clients their anxiety level actually lowers. So it's a simple one. Of course, we know of other things that deplete us from water: caffeine, alcohol, cigarettes. Those things do deplete our system. So if that's something we do, we need to be mindful to add that extra water back into our system. So absolutely makes a difference. And then, you know, diet for sure. And I say every body is different, as some of us are very sensitive to certain things. And if we don't know what that is, it can actually cause anxiety because our system is perhaps trying to break down a food that's not so easy for us. Not that we're allergic, but we may have a food sensitivity. So that's, again, a layer. And if we can discover what that is and manage it, and you're right, it is a surprise, because it certainly surprised me.
Well, and you know, what are some of the other factors?
Oh, sure. I can list them and then you can ask me questions.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
certainly physical activity or lack of it, not sleeping. And that's the next question I ask my clients is, how well are you sleeping? Because as you know, it only takes 2-3 nights of not sleeping well, our mental health plummets. So there's a whole mystery of, you know, if you're not sleeping well, we got to figure out why. So what's going on there? Reality. What's on your plate? And it's different for everybody, though. As you know, we need to know our limits. And you know, if we've got a lot of things or too many things on our plate, we can get easily overwhelmed or stressed. And or maybe we're waiting for a doctor's report, or maybe it's a new job, or maybe we're moving. All these things can attribute to anxiety. And sometimes just realizing, okay, I got a lot of things on my plate. Maybe I'm going to be restless and a little stressed, but it's going to end. So anxiety isn't always a bad thing. It's part of our humanness. And it can be an opportunity. However, if it stops us from living and thriving, then we really need to look at it a little deeper.
Okay, and let's talk about that, because like anything, there are certain levels. And so as we talk about learning disabilities, there are certain levels there. When we talk about anxiety or depression, certain levels, I mean, there are days I'll wake up and, man, I'm depressed because I'm not doing this or I'm not doing that type of thing, you know, and it's like, okay, I'm done. But I do know individuals, for instance, with anxiety, that it literally gets them to the point where they've lost emotional control. They can't stop crying. They can't stop doing things. So I'd love for you to talk about, you know, the different levels of anxiety, and at what point in time does it move from healthy anxiety, because obviously that is there to something that is not healthy for the individual and is actually causing harm emotionally to them.
Right. One of the things that I talk about is a scale 0 to 10. So zero is no disturbance. It's calm. 10 is I can't put a thought together. So what happens, what you're describing, you're talking about a 10. So outside of our thinking, we're having trouble functioning. That's a
Right.
problem for sure.
Okay. And in between, at what point in time do you say, all right, you know what? I mean, obviously, we all need to deal with the fact that, if we're going to have anxiety, let's make sure it's healthy and valuable to us. And if we start to experience the other, but at what level do you find that it becomes a challenge for an individual? Is that at a level 2, a level 3? And what do you start to see from a symptomology standpoint?
Well, it's different for all of us.
Okay.
So our number system, like I can give mine. Usually I let, my client decide is where do you usually function from when knowing, the 0 to 10, where are you? So, and so here's the thing is, and then I give mine, and we're all different. It's important to know. So these are some of the numbers that are so important to know. So right now I'm not a 0 because I'm not laying on the beach, chilling somewhere, though I'm not unhappy either. But I don't expect to be a 0. So I'm happy to be a 1 or 2. I'm excited and that's okay. And my number 1 or 2 is going to be different than yours. So what we need to know is what's that slippery slope for us? Like we know what a 10 is, that out of our mind, not thinking place. So for me, if I'm starting at a 4 or 5, I already know I've got to pull out my strategies because I don't want to go to a 6 or 7. That's already really uncomfortable for me. However, having said that, I've met people, they're happy at a 7. They like that stress that inspires them. And I'm just going, okay. So it just really, we need to know what's comfortable for us. We need to know, what's going to spike us to that 10. And sometimes it's one thing. We also need to know, do we have that slippery slope? If you don't feel good at a 3, well, then we got to start putting our strategies together and we got to figure out what is our goal. And I hope I've answered that.
Well, you have. And that brings up the question, because as we talk about anxiety, because you talk about stress, and let me ask you this question: is anxiety a symptom of overstress?
Well, that's a great question. I've been asked that. And some people have said, I don't have anxiety, which is, I kind of smile, and we all do because we're human. However, we call it different things. So whether you want to call it anxiety or not, that's okay. It's usually what anxiety is. It's anticipatory. So it's something that we're probably worried about in the future. It's not here right now. However, it shows up as stress. So the stress can be physical, cognitive, emotional, mental. And I've got different examples, but funny story. My friend that I cycle with, she said, I've discovered because I hang around you, I have anxiety. And so that was a bit of a laugh, but she said, you know what? It's just a word. And I said, that's right.
So at what point in time, the folks that are listening to this today, at what point in time do I go, okay, all of a sudden I'm feeling stress, and stress, as you say, stress is all around, but it's starting to affect me. Right. All right. What are some of those signs? What are some of those symptoms that all of a sudden you can say you've moved from healthy anxiety to you're beginning to experience unhealthy anxiety?
Right. And that's a great question, Doug. So physically, typically our physical symptoms that we think about are, butterflies in our stomach or fidgety. We think about those, but there's more increased heart rate. Some people actually have pain where they think they're having a heart attack, hives, rash. It also can be IBS, like irritable bowel syndrome. It can affect us that way. And shortness of breath, maybe weight gain, weight loss. It could be sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. So, it's like there can be a lot of physical symptoms, and all those, if they're prolonged, as you know, they will lead to something more serious. Cognitively, if you're having trouble with concentration, that could be a signal that, sometimes some of my clients, they just can't think when they're anxious. There's no thoughts happening. Memory problems, or perhaps negative thinking, like that catastrophe thinking. Behavioral things could be nail biting, fidgeting, perhaps OCD, like obsessive compulsive disorder, or it could be self-harming, things like that. And emotional could be feelings of dread, or just feeling worthless or overwhelmed. So, we can tolerate a little bit if we know, oh yeah, it's going to pass tomorrow or in an hour, or maybe when I get my banking done and, and my bills paid, I'm going to feel better. However, if you're having some of these things happen day after day and it's been going on, it's wearing. And yes, it'll cause problems for sure, physically, as well as perhaps how your life is unfolding.
Well, and it's kind of funny and not funny. I have a dog that my daughter has adopted, but he happens to be here now. And so I will get up in the morning sometimes and I'll walk him if she's not available. And in my neighborhood, a few years ago when I was walking my dog, I may see one or two, three people as I'm walking around with animals. Now it's like probably every other person that I pass, or every door that I pass, has this barking dog, this little animal or big animal. And it seems like people just have brought these animals in for, emotional support. And whether they consciously have done it or whether they've unconsciously done it, that seems to be what's happening. So in some respects, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about this, and then when we talk about emotional support, again, I look at that and I go, okay, that's a nice way to minimize anxiety, right? But does it really handle the situation? As I've mentioned before, I'm a retired dentist. One of the areas that I really enjoyed working with was chronic pain in the head and neck area, because that's the only area I could go, because it was close enough to the mouth that it was legal. All right. And so, people would come in, and I'm sure you've heard this, they will come into me and say, oh, I am in such pain, I have TMJ. And I'm going, okay, well, first of all, let's clarify something. You have two TMJs, one on the right side, one on the left side. So tell me what your symptoms are. Oh, well, I'm having headaches, I'm having neck aches, and so on and so forth. And it's like, okay, that's a different story. Now we know what we need to do, and we need to go look at the neurological and the physiological aspects of what is causing that. Where's the imbalance that's causing that? That's my question about anxiety. When someone comes into you and says, hey, I am experiencing high levels of anxiety, the question is, all right, and we all do that, but what is the root cause? Do you find that's a fairly standard question that goes on?
Yes. And one of the things that I liken myself as a detective. So there's this mystery, you're coming in, and I do talk to my clients like that and say, there's a mystery you're coming in with, and let's figure this out. I may ask some very different questions, and just know I'm a detective. So I'm going to be looking at, where is this all coming from? So I do talk about time frames. I talk about the diet, physicality, what's on your plate right now, and when did this start? These are some questions. And then I also talk about, sometimes people, it's about their social or cultural beliefs. They're feeling guilty about something, or they're second guessing. And perhaps they learned a belief system that's, they have it cognitively. However, it's not fitting with their life, so in their bodies, and self-doubt, perfectionism, perhaps family. Yeah, so it's like this journey and this discovery of, where is this coming from? What is the root cause? And sometimes it's a couple things. So we need to kind of look at that and go, okay, how can we lower the intensity of this unpleasant feeling, whatever it is that you're having, and start. That's what we do. And I try to, go with practical solutions. And sometimes it's nutrition. Sometimes, like if you've got a lot of things on your plate, but you're not supporting your nervous system, well, let's support your nervous system. Let's at least get you a place where, like, okay, maybe you've got like a lot of things that have to happen in 6 months. Then we've got to, just like a marathon, we've got to get some equipment going here, and nutrition, right?
Yeah. And so you had mentioned at the beginning, you had some really fun stories you could share. I'd love for you to share with the audience maybe 2 to 3 stories of individuals, which I know you can't use their names, but
Right.
individuals that you've worked with that come from different perspectives of anxiety, what they went through and how you helped them to overcome that.
Wow. Maybe you can be a little more specific. I'm trying to think, where do I reach into these stories? Well, the one I can think of right away is the water one. And I remember a woman came in and we talked about this. And so she started drinking water. And I've actually, different people of different ages, and they've come back and said, my problems didn't change. I just feel so much better. And I said, so what are you doing? And they said, well, I'm actually drinking more water, and it actually is making a big difference. And then with that, another story, I had a client phone me in quite a panic and feeling just terrible. And I just said, and I go right back to, so what have you been eating today? And this was about noon, I guess, when I called her back, and she said, I haven't eaten because I feel so sick. And I said, oh, so have you drank any water? And she said, no, but I've had about 10 cups of coffee. And, I just said, okay, you need to wean yourself off of coffee, and then call me back in a couple of days. And she actually phoned back and she said she felt a little bit silly because it was the coffee that made her ill. And it actually,
Wow.
so she couldn't, she just stopped drinking it. She replaced it. There's other caffeine that doesn't go to your nervous system. And so you just go with that. And so yerba mate is one of those. And you don't have to jazz yourself up with coffee that upsets your stomach. So those are some things. And then I did have a client come in, and she was, and I write about that one in the book, and she was just writing about all these things that was going on in her life. And mortgage she was waiting for approval on, and then her relationship was breaking down, and she also had to switch jobs, and she also was a sole provider for her 3 children. And, she was telling me the story about what was going on in her life. And I looked at her, after listening to her, and I said, if all those things were happening to me, I would have anxiety too. And I would feel, pretty terrible. And I would probably have trouble sleeping. And just the fact that I acknowledged her, she literally went like this. She said, you know what? I've got this. And I went, okay. And she said, this is temporary. I can do this. I just thought that, something was wrong with me. And I said, nothing's wrong with you. You just have a lot of things on your plate right now. And she said, but I can do this. So she said, I get it. I'm going to feel kind of yucky for a little while, but I can do this. And I went, wow. And you know what? That was one visit.
Okay. So let's talk about that, because that's certainly one level of anxiety where you've got
Right.
all of these things on your plate. And
Right.
I know that as I've been reading a little bit about what what you talk about and so forth, you can take those steps. You can say, okay, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things on your plate. and they're overwhelming you. So how do you have them start to deal with that?
Well, do you want me to give my personal how I do it and then coach
Absolutely.
people?
Well, how do you do it? Because if that's how you do it, I imagine that's how you help your clients to do it.
Absolutely. So one of the things is, if I wake up with anxiety, I go through my checklist. How was my sleeping? What's on my mind? What am I thinking about? Things like that. And it isn't very common anymore because I take care of my body. I take care of I feed my soul and my spirit. So, going and helping people with their checklist is also finding out where did this start? Sometimes it's unresolved grief that's been brewing, and and then we add pressures of our world on top of that. So again, it's about, what's that checklist? The other thing too is nutritionally, calcium and magnesium. I don't sell supplements. I just want to say that. I always tell my clients that. However, those are like, that feeds your nervous system. And so if I've got something going and I think, oh yeah, I got a pretty big day, I'll just have an extra calcium magnesium drink. You can buy them there. You can find it everywhere. It's not even expensive. And it's amazing because it feeds your nerves. And immediately my system starts to calm down, right? And then I'm ready.
Okay, so somewhere, and I'm not sure if I think I read this on your site somewhere. So I'm going to ask the question, what are your thoughts about the general medication and so much medication that's being given to people,
Right.
Anxiety medication and a depressive medication?
Right.
And I guess the question is, are you pro medication? Are you cautious medication? Or are you know what, for the most part, we have other ways to handle this so that you don't have to subject yourself to these medications that can have all sorts of deleterious side effects?
Absolutely. And that's a super question. And you know what, that's a great question for everybody to think about, is where are you at? And I mean, on my website, I say drug-free therapy. And first, like, medication isn't going to make your anxiety go away. What medication gives you, and I talk to clients about this because a lot of times they're struggling with it. And so I just say, okay, what is it that you want the medication to do? And, they'll say, well, I want it to make me feel calm. And I said, well, probably won't do that. But what it does do, it lowers the level of anxiety. So if you're at a place out of 10 and I've got clients that come like that and they can barely function. So yeah, the medication is going to calm that down so they don't feel like doing something drastic, because it can feel really unbearable. So, and my clients do struggle with medication. They don't want to be addicted to it. And I say, okay, but it's temporary. So, if it helps you, like, let's try some strategies. Let's see how this goes. And if you start feeling better, okay. However, if you still feel like, maybe there's a root cause that's much deeper, like a trauma or some bad memory that we haven't gotten to, maybe the medication is a way to just help you feel a little bit better. And clients typically do know when to go on or off. I always say, trust your body. Like, really, I can only give you suggestions. Bottom line, always trust yourself. And that's something we do too in the office, is I help people to get back to trusting their own intuitive, their own bodies. They're the one living their life 24/7, right?
Well, and as you say, the medication can help during a short period of time just to get them down there. You bring up some interesting points, though. You talk about unresolved sorrow. You talk about all of these subconscious elements that really, when I use the word subconscious, that's what I mean. They are really not aware
Right.
of those elements, and yet something triggers them, and all of a sudden they go into this anxiety situation where in many cases, like you say, they're up to an 8, 9, 10, where they've really lost control. They just have shut down to a large degree. Do you find that there are common subconscious elements through your practice that seem to continually come up? Or do you find that it's just a plethora of different things depending on the individual?
It's more different things. Like I think where you're going, and if I understand it correctly, is about trauma, and whether it's a death, and that could be a grief thing, could be traumatizing. There's different levels of what trauma is for us. And you also said one of my favorite words was awareness. So one of the things that I say in the book and my talks is, we need to be aware. We need to be aware what's going on with us. And here's a fun fact is we have trillions of neuroreceptors from our neck down, not so much our brain. And our brain is an organ, yet we forget that the brain is only using data that it's been fed, and that's not really us. And so it's this discovery of going back to our bodies. And if there's trauma in the body, it's going to also give these symptoms. And that's where, this discovery process is like, how do we find those? And that's about awareness, is how do we become aware? And some people know what their triggers are. They're very clear. They go, no, I stay away from clowns, or I stay away from chickens. They trigger me. Okay. However, sometimes we can't do that. And we don't know, like you said, a smell or a scene or something triggers us. And then, we have full blown anxiety and we don't know why. So yeah, it's awareness, and then the techniques, it's practice. Life is practice. Am I perfect at managing my anxiety? No. The difference though, for me, is now instead of pushing it away, I bring it to me and say, okay, what are you trying to tell me? What is it that I need to know today? What do I need to know about this? What's going on here in my body, my life, right? And then I can change it within either seconds, minutes, or the most now it's maybe an hour or two. After that, it's gone, and which I'm thrilled to say, because I wasn't like that, years ago. So
okay, so you know how to handle it yourself. So
yeah,
here's my question. Do your books, particularly the two that you've mentioned, really talk about how I could handle the anxiety that I'm experiencing? And does it really get to the root cause? Here's one of the elements that I think gets really interesting. I've talked to people who are seeing, quote, specialists, therapists, whatever. And oftentimes they talk and they talk and they talk and they talk, and they never get to the root cause. There's a reason you're on my show today. And that's because you use words like root cause and, drug-free and all of those types of things. So here's my question. How does someone who's really experiencing anxiety, number one, how do they help themselves? At what point in time do they need to go see a specialist, a therapist? And if they go to see someone to get help, what are the key elements that they can observe and go, you know what, this isn't the right person for me to be seeing, or, okay, this person's really going to get to the root causes of this and really help me to heal this, rather than just keep a blanket on it.
right. And you know what? Fabulous question. Absolutely. And so here's what, and this is my passion, of course, is the books. One of the things that I'm pleased to say, they're very easy to follow. So I have a phenomenal editor that is able to make sure that the instructions are easy and they make sense. So that I really attribute that to him. And the strategies are practical. And it's interesting, Doug, is that there's a lot of things we can do that don't cost a lot of money, and that we can actually, by understanding, is lower those levels. So, if we're running at a 7 or 8, it's not that difficult to get it lower to a 3 or a 2. So that's something that I'm pleased to say that the books can do. Now, and the other thing, what you asked about is, when is there the time to see a specialist? And it's interesting because I am not, many times I'm not the first therapist somebody has seen. They've gone through a couple, and bless their soul that they've had the courage to keep going, because not every connection is a good one. And so I actually also help people find therapists, because I do long distance counseling as well. So sometimes I've recognized, you need to go see somebody. And so I help them, and I help them interview as well. So you want somebody that is trauma trained. And I was just told this recently. One of my clients said, and I wasn't her first one, she said to me, she goes, there's a difference between a trauma therapist and a therapist. And I went, whoa, okay, tell me what that is. And she said, a trauma therapist knows how to listen, and they also know what to say and when, and there's a sensitivity. And I think it's important for listeners, if you're exploring this, is interview the therapist. And that's what I encourage my clients to do is, interview them, ask them what their training is in trauma, what their experience is, and listen to them. As you interview them, you're going to feel if there's a connection or not, and trust yourself. Like, just because they're a therapist, and I say that to my clients, just because I'm sitting in this therapy chair doesn't mean that I've got it down perfect, and doesn't mean my language is always going to be right, or that I'll suggest the right things, but I need feedback from the client. And if that therapist isn't willing to do that and be open, then you want to get somebody else, because this is hard work, and it's vulnerable work. And you want somebody to know or feel that sacredness of, it takes a lot of courage to come through the door and come and sit in the office. And you want somebody that can really be with you.
Well, and I love that concept of feedback, because, it's so interesting how, and my experience when I was treating chronic, head and neck pain, I was really looking at not only the neurological issues, but also the muscular relationships, the skeletal relationships, all of those types of things. And just like you talked about, drink some water, I'd put in some type of, very soft appliance that I could thicken, so that we could start to really check and see at what point in time is that relationship such that they start to feel the symptoms go away. And so I tell them, this isn't a cure, this is a diagnostic tool, and you're going to give me the feedback to do that. And it sounds like that's the same thing that people should be looking for in the therapist. Now, there are different modalities that people use. I know that you are a certified EMDR therapist. What does EMDR stand for?
Well, EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a big mouthful. Francine Shapiro named it about 45 years ago now, and it rapidly became very popular with our veterans. And certainly that's where a lot of this research, right? Yeah. So certified, and if people do want to go that route, I recommend they go with someone certified because we're trained in trauma and we need to keep up our certification. So it's an international standing, and we need to, take courses and keep that standing up. And yes, there are many modalities, and you're right. I always say there's many roads to Rome. Yeah. And it's got to be the right road for you. So not everybody, everybody's different. So, and that's what I explore with my clients. And it's like, what's going to work? And And sometimes they already know what's going to work and what isn't going to work. So then we explore some possibilities, right?
And do you find that the majority, or I would maybe better ask, what percentage do you find that you work with actually have those subconscious situations and imprints that are triggering them into an anxiety episode?
Well, probably, you know what, it's hard. That's a hard one to answer, only because I have a reputation here for working with trauma first responders. So people already know that. So I tend to treat a lot of people with trauma. However, the other kind of, if I were to say other section of clients I have, I think that's where you're asking is, most people have belief systems that create a lot of inner conflict, and that can create anxiety. So they, like, for an example, is they feel they should be a good daughter and have family reunions or create a Thanksgiving dinner, yet there's everything in their body that doesn't want to do it because of the dynamics or whatever. So there's a belief system and that goes against what's real in their lives. So that, I'll help people understand where that inner conflict's coming from. So that's a lot, I think, a lot of underlying causes of anxiety.
And as you talk about those belief systems, do you find that the EMDR and some of those other things, I mean, I know that as I've worked with people using an entirely different modality, as we get back to that, sometimes you get literally back to that moment in time, particularly in their childhood, where they had some type of experience that we could label as trauma. It isn't necessarily, but we could label and particularly their perception is that this has become a traumatic moment for them. And being able to go back in and have them understand that, accept it, release it, reprogram it, whatever that happens to be, and however you do that, seems to really help.
Yes.
Do you find that is in fact the case, where you can go back and do that?
Yeah, so a lot of traumas, and we call them big T's and little T's. So, and I think you're mentioning that not every trauma is catastrophic. So it could be, being accused of stealing, that could have been imprinted in the mind, and the brain has grabbed that belief and said, oh, that's the truth. Or maybe it's falling off a bicycle and getting stitches. And, so not every trauma is catastrophic. So sometimes it's repetitive and sometimes it is catastrophic, though most of the time, and probably, most of the time, a belief is attached to that trauma. So yes, and so going through that, and I'm also an expressive arts therapist. So sometimes we go to the arts, and it's to change the cognitive pathways in that brain, our organ, so that it doesn't always go to that place. Or if it does go to that place, is to at least recognize it and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, thank you, brain. I get it. We're going there, but that's not where I want to go. So let's step back. We can think about this and then take another direction. So,
well, and you bring up a really important point, and it's science. Is you can go in and change those neurological pathways. It doesn't mean that they necessarily go away, at least from people I've talked to, but they kind of move to the side because you've created a new pathway that is more positive and more enabling for you, rather than these pathways that get you back to those negative aspects and so forth. So as we near time, I still have a couple of questions. Number one, you talked about belief systems that can be, in some respects, they can be deleterious to the individual. So one question is, how do you help them to change those beliefs, or at least reframe those beliefs? And we have maybe 3 or 4 minutes to do this. And secondarily, One of those beliefs that I find as I talk to people really is this universal concept of perfectionism. I love to do some personality behavioral analysis profiles, and there are particular profiles that have a tendency towards perfectionism, and that perfectionism really puts them into a state of anxiety. So how do you change beliefs? How do you change a deeply embedded belief system for those children that have grown up and all of a sudden they're in their early 20s and they are struggling? And then number two, how do you deal with this sense of perfectionism? 4 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, right. Nice. Thanks. Okay. Beliefs. What I do is, and I don't have my little flip chart here, but I write out the word. So belief, BELIEFS. So there's a little word in there, and then I underline it. And of course, if you can visualize it, it's the word lie. And so I underline that. And then I ask the person, like, first of all, it's discovering what is the belief system. And belief systems are neither right or wrong. So it's not a right or wrong that I need to be the good daughter to make the dinner. That's not a right or wrong. And that's why we get this argument. But so the awareness is now, is that belief true 100% of the time? So whether that's, I need to work hard, or, men don't cry. We still have that belief going on. Is it true 100% of the time? And as soon as our brain goes, no, it's not, we began to change the belief. So we need to give the brain, right, new information. So the brain knows that. It's very practical. So the other thing about perfectionism, I feel like I'm on a game show, is it's not wrong to have a high bar. It is not wrong to have a high bar. But here's the but, and I don't say but very often, is if it's giving you pain and the people in your life pain, and that's when to look at it and to own it. So I have a high bar, and I've looked at that myself. And I was giving people around me pain, whether it was a contractor, whether it was my family. And now when I have that piece, I just go, you know what, just go straighten the towels and close the cupboards. Don't worry about it. It's mine. It's my bar. So to know that as humans, it's our innate nature to strive, to learn, to explore. And when I talk about critical thinking, that's in us. That's natural. And so our critical thinking is always a little bit higher than, what our bodies can do. So it's just understanding that and knowing that. And I'm not done yet.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it is just understanding, as you say, and as you started to laugh about it, it's like, all right, I'm a perfectionist, and all of a sudden, oh man, here I am caught up in that perfectionism cycle, and laugh at yourself, because once you do that, it starts to withdraw. So,
well, yeah, and to laugh and just to go, you know what, this is what it is, and it's not wrong. I'm not bad. So that self-talk changes, and not to give people around you pain because you're expecting all the drawers to be closed, and the towels to be straight or whatever. But anyways.
All right. Well, Elke, this has been amazing. And unfortunately, we are at a time crunch. When this is on the radio, they tell me you can only go so long, and then that's it, because we need time to do some things for the next show. So I really appreciate this. In fact, I think I need to get you on again, because we could go on and on forever. But as we close, a few things I'd like you to do. Number one, again, share the name of your 2 books that we talked about.
Okay.
Number 1. Number 2, how do people reach you? And number 3, what would be your final message to the listeners today?
Sure. Well, the best way to get the books, we've recreated a very easy website. anxietywarrior.ca. It's the easiest. Just go on there. There's all the links to your favorite booksellers. There's also a link to my website, which is a separate website. People are welcome to email me and ask questions. So you've got that. And then my 2 words, my favorite words. Well, I have a few favorite words, but the 2 is awareness. Become aware of yourself and what's going on for you. And then practice. Life is just practice. So, maybe relax and know that we might not have it perfect today as perfectionists, that it's just practice. Life and being aware and practicing.
Well, Elke, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr.
Great.
Doug. I appreciate it too.
And folks, I hope this is making a difference for you. And please get a hold of her, get a hold of those books. They're just amazing. I'll put them in the notes for the podcast. And again, Elke, thank you so much. And folks, have a great week. We look forward to have you joining us again soon.